Welcome back to another quiet journey through history's forgotten corners. Tonight, we're wandering into the tender, aching aftermath of humanity's oldest ritual, drinking just a little too much. From Viking halls to Egyptian temples, from Roman baths to Persian courts, our ancestors have always faced the same bleary-eyed morning question: how do we make this pounding headache go away? Before we settle into this gentle exploration of historical remedies, some surprisingly sensible, others wonderfully absurd, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us on these sleepy historical wanderings. Now, dim the lights, find your most comfortable position, and let's drift back to a time when the cure for too much wine might involve boiled bird beaks, cold morning air, or the gentle wisdom of a court physician trying to sober up a king before diplomatic disaster strikes. The human relationship with alcohol spans millennia, and so does our eternal quest to undo its effects. Tonight, we'll explore not just the remedies themselves, but the quiet desperation, the cultural rituals, and the surprising ingenuity that surrounded these ancient attempts at morning after salvation. Verse 1, the Vikings' lament, daily life immersion. Picture, if you will, a longhouse in the depths of a Norwegian winter, sometime in the 10th century. The great hall, which just hours before had echoed with boisterous laughter and the clash of drinking horns, now lies in that peculiar silence that follows a truly memorable feast. Embers glow dimly in the central hearth, casting dancing shadows across scattered rushes and the occasional unconscious warrior. In the corner, beneath a heavy woolen cloak that smells of smoke and mead, a Viking named Bjorn slowly returns to consciousness. His first sensation is not sight or sound, but the dull, persistent throb behind his eyes, a rhythm that seems to match the distant beating of Odin's raven's wings. His mouth tastes of fermented honey and regret. Bjorn attempts to sit up, only to discover that his drinking horn, a beautifully carved piece made from an aurochs, horn and rimmed with silver, has somehow become adhered to his right hand. The dried mead has acted as a surprisingly effective adhesive, creating what might be history's first recorded case of drinking vessel dependency. He tugs gently, then more insistently, but the horn remains stubbornly attached. This is not an unusual morning in Viking society. The culture that gave us the concept of Valhalla, where warriors feast and drink eternally, also had to contend with the very earthly consequences of their enthusiasm for fermented beverages. Mead, ale, and imported wine flowed freely in Viking halls, especially during the long winter months when indoor entertainment was limited to storytelling, gaming, and drinking contests that could last for days. The Vikings, practical people that they were, had developed a sophisticated understanding of what we might call hangover management. Bjorn knows, even through his current fog of discomfort, exactly what he needs to do. First, he must free himself from his horn, a task that will require soaking his hand in the wooden basin of cold water, kept perpetually ready for such emergencies. The water is shockingly cold, drawn from a well that taps into the deep, clean aquifers beneath the settlement. As Bjorn submerges his hand, he feels the mead's sticky grip gradually loosening. The cold also provides the first relief his throbbing head has felt since awakening. His grandmother had taught him that cold water draws the heat from fevered blood, and while she was speaking of actual fever, Bjorn has found the principle applies equally well to the burning sensation that follows too much drink. Once free from his horn, Bjorn follows the established ritual of Viking hangover recovery. He wraps his cloak more tightly around his shoulders and steps outside into the crisp morning air. The cold hits him like a physical blow, but it's a welcome one. The sharp wind off the fjord seems to cut through the fog in his mind, and he stands there for several minutes, breathing deeply and letting the chill seep into his bones. This practice of cold air treatment was not merely folk wisdom, it was based on sound observation. The Vikings understood that fresh air and cold temperatures could help restore mental clarity, though they explained it through their understanding of the body's humors, rather than our modern knowledge of oxygen and blood circulation. They believed that excessive drink heated the blood and clouded the mind with warm vapors, and that cold air would cool these vapors and restore balance. After his cold air treatment, Bjorn returns to the longhouse where his wife, Ingrid, has prepared what every Viking knows to be the most essential element of hangover recovery: a bowl of thick, salty broth. This isn't just any broth, it's made from the bones of the previous night's feast, slowly simmered with herbs and sea salt. The recipe has been passed down through generations of Viking women, each adding their own refinements. Ingrid's broth contains marrow-rich bones that have been cooking since before dawn, releasing their nutrients into the liquid. She's added dried seaweed for salt and minerals, wild garlic for its cleansing properties, and a handful of dried cloudberries for their vitamin content, though she would describe their purpose as sweetening the blood rather than providing ascorbic acid. As Bjorn sips the warm broth, he feels it working its quiet magic. The salt replaces what his body lost through the night's excess, while the fat from the marrow coats his irritated stomach. The warmth spreads through his chest and seems to ease the tight feeling in his head. This is comfort food elevated to medicine, and it represents perhaps the most sophisticated hangover cure of the early medieval period. The ritual doesn't end with the broth. Ingrid also prepares a drink made from fermented maraise milk mixed with honey and a pinch of ground juniper berries. This concoction, known as morning mead, contains far less alcohol than the previous night's beverages, but enough to ease the sharp edge of withdrawal. The Vikings understood, perhaps better than many modern sufferers, that the cure for too much drink was sometimes a little more drink carefully measured and properly timed. While Bjorn recovers, the rest of the household begins to stir. The longhouse slowly fills with the sounds of similar morning-after rituals. The splash of water in basins, the soft murmur of healing conversations, the gentle clatter of pottery as restorative broths are ladled out. There's no shame in these morning rituals. They're as much a part of Viking culture as the drinking that necessitated them. By midday, Bjorn will be ready to resume his daily activities. The headache will have faded to a dull memory, his stomach will have settled, and his hand will bear only a slight stickiness as evidence of the night's adventures. He'll spend the afternoon repairing fishing nets or sharpening weapons, and by evening, he'll be ready to gather around the fire once again, horn in hand, to toast the gods and honor the ancestors. This cycle feast, recovery, feast again, formed the rhythm of Viking social life. Their hangover cures weren't just medical treatments. They were cultural rituals that reinforced community bonds, family care, and the practical wisdom that enabled their society to function despite, or perhaps because of, their legendary capacity for celebration. The Vikings understood something that many modern sufferers forget. Recovering from overindulgence isn't just about physical remedies. It's about patience, ritual, community support, and the gentle wisdom that comes from accepting that some mornings simply require a slower pace and a little extra kindness to yourself and others. As the winter sun reaches its highest point, still low on the horizon in this northern land, Bjorn looks out over the fjord with clear eyes once again. The water sparkles with ice crystals, and somewhere in the distance, he can hear the sound of other longhouses beginning their day. Tonight, there will be another feast, another opportunity to test the limits of human endurance and Viking hospitality. But for now, in this quiet moment of recovery, Bjorn appreciates the simple pleasure of a clear head, a settled stomach, and the knowledge that even the worst morning eventually gives way to afternoon, and afternoon to the gentle promise of another evening by the fire. Verse 2, Franklin's Methodical Morning, Biography Event. Let us now drift forward through time, from the fjords of Norway to the cobblestone streets of 18th century Philadelphia, where another man of considerable appetites is confronting the familiar challenge of morning after restoration. Benjamin Franklin, at the age of 62, sits in his study on Market Street, methodically applying his scientific mind to what he privately calls the art of resurrection from revelry. The previous evening had been particularly spirited. Franklin had hosted a gathering of the American Philosophical Society, where learned men discussed natural philosophy, politics, and the proper fermentation of various colonial beverages. What had begun as a scholarly examination of Pennsylvania's brewing techniques had evolved, as these gatherings often did, into a practical demonstration that lasted well past midnight. Now, as the morning light filters through his study windows, Franklin contemplates the pounding in his temples with the same analytical approach he might apply to understanding electricity or the Gulf Stream. He has, over the years, developed what he considers to be a scientifically sound method for addressing what he delicately refers to as the consequences of convivial excess. Franklin reaches for his leather-bound journal, the one reserved for personal observations and domestic experiments. His handwriting, usually so precise, shows the slight tremor of a man whose hand has not yet fully recovered from the previous night's activities. At the top of a fresh page, he writes, "On the restoration of equilibrium following festive indulgence. Morning observations. 3rd day of October, 1768. His first step, documented with characteristic thoroughness, involves what he calls the introduction of cold air to heated chambers. Franklin opens both windows in his study, despite the autumn chill, and removes his nightgown. Standing in his linen shirt and breeches, he allows the cold Philadelphia air to circulate around his body for precisely 10 minutes, timing himself with the brass clock on his mantelpiece. This air bath, as he calls it, is based on his theory that excessive drink creates an imbalance of warm and moist humors in the body. Cold air, he believes, helps to restore the natural equilibrium by drawing out the corrupt vapors that cause headache and nausea. While his theoretical framework differs from modern understanding, his practical application is remarkably sound. The cold air increases circulation, provides fresh oxygen, and helps regulate his body temperature. After his air bath, Franklin dresses methodically in clean linen and his second-best waistcoat. He has observed that wearing fresh clothes contributes significantly to the restoration process, though he's not entirely certain why. In his journal, he notes, "Clean garments upon a disordered body provide a curious comfort to the mind, suggesting that external order may influence internal harmony." Franklin's next step involves what he has termed the strategic application of dry nourishment. From his kitchen, he retrieves several slices of day-old bread, which he has specifically allowed to become quite dry and hard. He eats these slowly, without butter or jam, chewing each bite thoroughly. This practice, he has discovered through careful experimentation, helps to settle his stomach far more effectively than rich or greasy foods. Alongside the dry bread, Franklin prepares his signature hangover beverage, a mixture of cool water, a small amount of honey, and a pinch of salt. He drinks this slowly, in small sips, over the course of 30 minutes. The honey provides gentle energy without overwhelming his sensitive stomach, while the salt helps restore what he calls the body's natural saline balance. But Franklin's approach goes beyond mere physical remedies. He has developed what might be called a psychological component to his recovery method. While sipping his honey water, he reads from his collection of philosophical works. Never anything too stimulating, but gentle, contemplative pieces that engage his mind without overstimulating it. Today, he chooses a few pages from Marcus Aurelius, finding the Stoic Emperor's meditations particularly appropriate for his current condition. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it, he reads aloud, his voice still slightly hoarse from the previous night's animated discussions. The words seem to resonate with his current state, reminding him that this discomfort, like all things, is temporary and largely subject to his own perception and response. Franklin has also developed a series of what he calls gentle exercises for hangover recovery. These consist of slow, deliberate movements designed to restore circulation without causing additional stress to his system. He begins with simple arm circles, then progresses to careful neck rotations, and finally performs a series of deep breathing exercises that he learned from studying both Eastern philosophy and his own observations of respiratory function. Perhaps most remarkably, Franklin has created what he calls the morning inventory, a practice of writing down, in careful detail, everything he remembers from the previous evening. This serves multiple purposes. It exercises his memory, provides a record of interesting conversations and ideas, and most importantly, gives him something productive to focus on while his body recovers. In today's inventory, he records, discussed with Dr. Rush the potential medical applications of electrical therapy, debated with Mr. Adams the proper role of taverns in democratic society, exchanged recipes for apple brandy with the Moravian minister, witnessed young Mr. Hamilton's impressive capacity for both drink and discourse on fiscal policy. The act of writing, Franklin has noticed, seems to help organize his thoughts and provide a sense of continuity between his evening and morning selves. It also serves as a gentle reminder that his social gatherings, while sometimes excessive, are also intellectually productive and personally meaningful. By mid-morning, Franklin's systematic approach has begun to show results. The pounding in his head has diminished to a dull ache. His stomach has settled enough to accept a simple breakfast of porridge and wheat tea, and his hands have steadied sufficiently for him to resume his correspondence. He writes to his friend in London, "I find that the application of scientific method to personal discomfort yields far better results than the common remedies of strong drink or continued bed rest. The body, like any natural system, responds predictably to consistent, logical treatment." Franklin's hangover cure reflects his broader philosophy of life, that careful observation, systematic experimentation, and rational analysis can improve almost any human condition. His method lacks the ritualistic warmth of the Viking approach, but it possesses a different kind of comfort, the reassurance that comes from understanding and controlling one's circumstances. As the morning progresses, Franklin gradually returns to his normal routine. He reviews his printing business accounts, responds to letters from fellow philosophers, and begins preparing for the day's appointments. By noon, he feels sufficiently recovered to walk to the tavern for his usual meal, though he notes in his journal that he will limit himself to a single pint of ale with his dinner. The beauty of Franklin's approach lies not just in its effectiveness, but in its reflection of Enlightenment ideals applied to the most human of problems. Where ancient cultures might have appealed to gods or relied on traditional remedies, Franklin approaches his hangover as a problem to be solved through reason, observation, and systematic application of logical principles. In his final note of the morning, Franklin writes, "The greatest benefit of methodical recovery is not merely the restoration of physical comfort, but the satisfaction of having transformed a period of weakness into an opportunity for scientific observation and personal improvement. Even our failures can become data for future success." This approach, turning personal discomfort into intellectual exercise, would become a hallmark of Franklin's character and a model for how educated colonists might approach life's inevitable challenges. His hangover cure was, in its own way, a small declaration of independence from the tyranny of physical weakness and a demonstration that American ingenuity could be applied to any problem, no matter how humble or embarrassing. As afternoon arrives, Franklin closes his journal and prepares for another day of invention, diplomacy, and yes, probably another evening of convivial excess. But now he faces it with the confidence of a man who has reduced even his weaknesses to a manageable system. Verse 3. Mysteries of the Nile, Ancient Egyptian Hangover Cures. Our journey through time now carries us further back, to the sun-baked banks of the Nile, where the ancient Egyptians had elevated the treatment of overindulgence to an art form as sophisticated as their pyramid building. In the shadow of Memphis, in a workshop that combines apothecary with temple, A priest-physician named Kamwasit carefully prepares remedies that would seem both wonderful and bewildering to our modern sensibilities. The workshop itself tells a story of medical sophistication. Rows of ceramic jars line walls, decorated with hieroglyphic instructions for various treatments. The morning light, filtered through wooden shutters, illuminates an array of instruments. Bronze mortar for grinding, limestone pallets for mixing, and delicate glass vessels for storing the most precious ingredients. The air carries the complex fragrance of dried herbs, exotic spices, and the faint metallic tan of the Nile mud that forms the base of many Egyptian remedies. Kaim Wasit moves through his morning preparations with the practiced grace of someone who has spent decades studying the mysteries of the human body. Today, he expects several visitors who will arrive with the telltale signs of what the Egyptians called the weight of yesterday's joy, that familiar combination of headache, nausea, and general misery that follows too enthusiastic a celebration. Egyptian society, contrary to some modern assumptions, was quite fond of alcoholic beverages. Beer was a daily necessity, consumed by everyone from pharaohs to field workers, while wine was reserved for special occasions and religious ceremonies. The Egyptians had developed sophisticated brewing and winemaking techniques, creating beverages of varying strengths and flavors. With such a developed drinking culture came an equally developed understanding of its consequences. The first remedy Kaim Wasit prepares involves what modern observers might find the most unusual ingredient: carefully prepared bird beaks. These are not from just any birds, but specifically from ibises, the sacred birds associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom and healing. The beaks have been thoroughly cleaned, dried in the desert sun for 40 days, and then ground to a fine powder using techniques passed down through generations of temple physicians. The process of preparing the beak powder is both ritual and medicine. Kaim Wasit places the ground beaks in a small bronze vessel and adds water that has been blessed in the temple of Ptah. As the mixture slowly comes to a boil over a charcoal fire, he chants quietly, not magical incantations, but memorized formulas that help him time the cooking process precisely. The result is a bitter, slightly gritty liquid that, when strained through fine linen, becomes a surprisingly effective treatment for nausea and headache. While the ibis beak remedy simmers, Kaim Wasit prepares his second signature treatment, a complex mixture involving lotus root. The lotus, sacred to the Egyptians, as a symbol of rebirth and renewal, grows abundantly in the quieter backwaters of the Nile. Kaim Wasit uses specifically the thick, starchy root of the blue lotus, which he has harvested at dawn when the flowers are just beginning to open. The lotus root is prepared through a process that combines practical medicine with spiritual symbolism. First, it is carefully cleaned and sliced into thin, uniform pieces. These pieces are then soaked in date wine, not to add alcohol, but because the natural sugars in the wine help extract the active compounds from the root. The soaking process takes exactly 1 day and 1 night, representing the cycle of death and rebirth that the lotus symbolizes. After soaking, the lotus root pieces are pressed to extract their essence, which is then mixed with honey from the temple's own beehives and a pinch of matron salt from the desert. The resulting liquid has a sweet, slightly floral taste that masks its medicinal properties. When consumed, it produces a gentle sense of calm and well-being, along with relief from the anxiety and agitation that often accompany severe hangovers. But Kaim Wasit's most sophisticated remedy involves an ingredient that demonstrates the far-reaching trade networks of ancient Egypt, frankincense from the mysterious land of Punt. This aromatic resin, more valuable than gold, arrives in Memphis aboard ships that have traveled the treacherous waters of the Red Sea. For hangover treatment, Kaim Wasit uses not the resin itself, but the inner bark of the frankincense tree, which contains different active compounds. The frankincense bark is prepared through a process that takes several days. It is first soaked in milk from goats that graze on the desert's edge, then dried and ground with mortar and pestle until it becomes a fine aromatic powder. This powder is then mixed with oil pressed from moringa seeds and heated gently until it forms a smooth paste. The paste is applied to the forehead and temples, where it creates a cooling sensation that seems to draw the pain from the head. The effectiveness of these remedies lies not just in their active ingredients, but in the holistic approach that surrounds their use. When a patient arrives at Khaemwaset's workshop, suffering from the after effects of celebration, the treatment begins before any medicine is administered. The patient is invited to lie on a comfortable mat in a quiet corner of the workshop, where the lighting is dim and the air is scented with mild incense. Khaemwaset begins with what he calls the restoration of balance. Using techniques that combine massage with pressure point therapy, he gently works the muscles of the neck and shoulders, areas where tension often concentrates during hangover recovery. His hands, skilled from years of practice, seem to locate precisely the spots where discomfort has gathered, working them with gentle pressure until the muscles begin to relax. While performing the massage, Khaemwaset often tells his patients stories from Egyptian mythology, not as entertainment, but as a form of guided meditation. He might recount the journey of Ra through the underworld, or describe the peaceful afterlife fields where the blessed dead harvest grain beneath eternal sunshine. These stories, familiar and comforting, help distract the mind from present discomfort while the body begins its natural healing process. The administration of the remedies themselves follows a carefully choreographed sequence. First comes the ibis beak preparation, served warm in a small clay cup. Patients are instructed to sip it slowly, allowing each mouthful to rest on the tongue before swallowing. The bitter taste, while unpleasant, is said to wake the stomach and prepare it for healing. Next comes the lotus root mixture, served at room temperature in a cup made from blue glazed pottery. This remedy is consumed more quickly, but still with deliberate attention to the process. Patients are told to focus on the gradual warming sensation that spreads through their chest and the gentle easing of tension in their head and neck. Finally, the frankincense paste is applied to the forehead with ceremonial care. Using a small brush made from palm fiber, Khaemwaset paints the paste in intricate patterns that follow the natural lines of the skull. As the paste dries, it creates a subtle pulling sensation that many patients find deeply relaxing, as if the very pain is being drawn out through the skin. The entire treatment process typically takes about 2 hours, during which time patients often drift in and out of light sleep. The workshop is designed to encourage this restful state, with soft sand floors that muffle sound and walls thick enough to block the noise of the bustling city outside. By the time the treatment is complete, most patients report feeling not just physically better, but spiritually refreshed, as if they have undergone a ritual purification rather than simply taking medicine. What makes the Egyptian approach particularly fascinating is its integration of practical medicine with spiritual healing. Khaemwaset understands that hangovers affect not just the body, but the spirit. They leave people feeling disconnected from their normal selves, ashamed of their excess, and worried about their ability to function in society. His remedies address these psychological aspects as thoroughly as they treat the physical symptoms. As the afternoon sun begins to slant through the workshop windows, Khaemwaset often reflects on the deeper meaning of his work. In a society that saw divine purpose in every aspect of life, even the treatment of overindulgence becomes a form of religious practice. By helping people recover from their excesses, he is participating in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governs all existence. His patients leave the workshop not just feeling better, but carrying with them a sense of having participated in something ancient and meaningful. They return to their daily lives with renewed appreciation for the balance between celebration and restraint, pleasure and responsibility. In this way, Khaemwaset's hangover cures become not just medical treatments, but lessons in the art of living well. The mysteries of Egyptian hangover treatment remind us that healing has always been about more than just addressing symptoms. It involves understanding the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, and creating an environment where natural recovery can occur. In their sophisticated blend of practical medicine and spiritual care, the ancient Egyptians created a model of holistic healing that remains relevant across the millennia. Verse 4. The court physician's dilemma, contrasting perspective. In the opulent palace of Persepolis, as the first light of dawn creeps over the carved stone reliefs of ancient kings, a crisis unfolds with the quiet urgency that only palace life can produce. Darius, court physician to King Xerxes II, moves through the marble corridors with measured steps that betray none of the anxiety churning in his chest. In less than 2 hours, his sovereign must receive the Byzantine ambassador in a ceremony that will determine the fate of trade routes worth a kingdom's ransom. The problem is that the king, at this very moment, is in no condition to receive anyone more demanding than his own reflection. The previous evening's banquet had been intended as a diplomatic triumph. Persian hospitality demanded that foreign dignitaries be entertained with magnificent excess, and the king had personally overseen every detail of the feast. Golden goblets filled with wine from the slopes of Mount Ararat, platters of pomegranates and dates arranged like jeweled mosaics, and entertainment that included dancers from India and musicians from the far reaches of the empire. What was meant to impress the visiting dignitaries had instead become an exercise in competitive consumption, with the king determined to demonstrate Persian superiority through his capacity for wine. Now, as Darius approaches the royal chambers, he can hear the soft groans that confirm his fears. The king lies sprawled across silk cushions, his usually immaculate beard disheveled, his eyes squeezed shut against the morning light that filters through the carved wooden screens. The royal regalia, the golden crown, the ceremonial robes, the jeweled sword lie scattered across the room like artifacts from a conquered civilization. "My lord," Darius says softly, approaching the bed with the careful steps of a man who understands that even whispers can feel like thunderclaps to a suffering monarch. The Byzantine ambassador arrives at the 9th hour. "We must begin your preparation immediately." The king's response is a wordless gesture that, while not suitable for diplomatic discourse, effectively communicates his current state of mind. Darius has seen this condition before in lesser nobles, in wealthy merchants, even in his own mirror after particularly festive occasions. But treating a hangover becomes exponentially more complex when the patient must appear godlike and infallible in front of foreign dignitaries within hours. Darius opens his leather satchel and begins arranging his tools with the precision of a general preparing for battle. Persian medicine, influenced by Greek philosophy and Indian practice, approaches hangover treatment as a matter of restoring the body's natural balance. But today, he must accomplish in 2 hours what would normally take half a day, and he must do it while maintaining the dignity and authority of the crown. His first remedy is one that has been tested in the most demanding circumstances: a mixture of crushed pearls and rosewater. The pearls, imported from the warm seas beyond Arabia, are ground to an impossibly fine powder, using a jade mortar that has been in the royal pharmacy for 3 generations. The rosewater comes from the king's own gardens, where Persian gardeners have cultivated roses so fragrant that their petals are said to contain the essence of paradise itself. The pearl powder is mixed with rosewater in proportions that Darius has memorized through years of practice. Exactly 13 measures of rosewater to 1 measure of pearl dust. The mixture is then heated gently over a flame fed by sandalwood chips, creating a preparation that is as much aromatherapy as medicine. The crushed pearls, according to Persian medical theory, cool the heated blood and restore clarity to the mind, while the rosewater soothes the stomach and provides a sense of spiritual calm. As the pearl and rose water mixture warms, Darius prepares his second intervention, a compress made from silk, soaked in water that has been infused with mint leaves, and cooled with chips of ice from the palace's underground storage chambers. The ice, harvested from mountain peaks and transported to the palace, through an elaborate system of underground tunnels, is one of the most precious commodities in the Persian Empire. Its use for hangover treatment demonstrates both the seriousness of the situation and the resources available to royal medicine. While the compress works its cooling magic, Darius begins the most delicate part of his treatment, the administration of what he privately calls the awakening mixture. This preparation requires ingredients that represent the far-reaching power of the Persian Empire: ginger from the Indies, cinnamon from Ceylon, and honey from the sacred groves of Hyrcania. These are combined with a small amount of opium, not enough to intoxicate, but sufficient to ease the king's discomfort without clouding his judgment. "My lord," Darius says gently, "you must drink this slowly, allowing each sip to rest on your tongue before swallowing. Think of it as you would the finest wine, deserving of contemplation and respect." The king, despite his discomfort, manages a weak smile at this comparison. He has always appreciated Darius's ability to frame even the most unpleasant necessities in terms that acknowledge his royal dignity. As he sips the mixture, Darius begins the next phase of treatment, a gentle massage using oil that has been scented with frankincense and myrrh. The massage technique Darius employs is based on principles learned from Indian physicians who visited the Persian court. He works with careful attention to specific points on the neck and shoulders, areas where tension tends to accumulate during times of physical and mental stress. His hands, skilled from years of practice, seem to locate precisely the spots where discomfort has concentrated, working them with gentle pressure until the muscles begin to relax. As he works, Darius speaks in low, soothing tones about the day's upcoming ceremony. He doesn't discuss the technical details of the diplomatic negotiations, but instead focuses on the visual and ceremonial aspects that will help the king prepare mentally for his performance. He describes the ambassador's expected gifts, the arrangement of the throne room, and the carefully choreographed sequence of events that will showcase Persian power and hospitality. This psychological preparation is perhaps the most crucial element of Darius's treatment. A hungover merchant can afford to appear slightly diminished, but a king must project strength and authority regardless of his physical condition. By helping the king visualize his upcoming performance, Darius is treating not just the hangover, but the anxiety and self-doubt that often accompany it. The transformation that occurs over the next hour is remarkable. The cold compress reduces the swelling around the king's eyes and restores some color to his complexion. The awakening mixture settles his stomach and provides the energy he needs to sit upright and speak clearly. The massage relieves the tension in his neck and shoulders, allowing him to hold his head with royal bearing once again. But perhaps most importantly, the careful attention and respect with which Darius has conducted the treatment has restored the king's confidence in his ability to fulfill his royal duties. By treating him as a monarch who happens to be experiencing physical discomfort, rather than as a patient who happens to be royal, Darius has preserved the psychological foundation upon which successful kingship depends. As the time for the ceremony approaches, Darius helps the king dress in his formal robes. The silk garments, woven with threads of gold and silver, are designed to catch and reflect light in ways that enhance the wearer's natural radiance. The ceremonial crown, carefully placed on the king's still tender head, transforms him from a suffering human being into a living symbol of Persian power. The final test comes when the king must walk from his chambers to the throne room, a journey that requires him to pass through corridors where courtiers and servants will observe his every step. Darius walks slightly behind and to the left, close enough to provide support if needed, but far enough away to maintain the illusion of royal self-sufficiency. The king's bearing is not perfect. Those who know him well might notice a slight stiffness in his movements, a careful deliberation in his steps. But to the Byzantine ambassador, who has traveled months to reach this moment, the Persian king appears exactly as he should, powerful, dignified, and utterly in command of his empire. As the ceremony begins, Darius watches from the shadows, ready to intervene if his sovereign shows signs of distress. But the king performs his role flawlessly, conducting the diplomatic ritual with the gravitas and authority that have made Persia the envy of the ancient world. The hangover cure has succeeded not just in treating physical symptoms, but in preserving the mystique of divine kingship that holds the empire together. Later, as the ambassador departs with favorable treaties and generous gifts, Darius reflects on the morning's work. He has not merely treated a hangover. He has participated in the maintenance of imperial power, the preservation of diplomatic relationships, and the continuation of a civilization that spans 3 continents. In the Persian Empire, even a court physician's hangover cure becomes an act of statecraft. The king, now genuinely recovered and privately grateful, will reward Darius with gold and honors. But the physician's greatest satisfaction comes from knowing that his skills have served not just his patient, but the stability and prosperity of the realm. In the delicate balance of ancient politics, even the treatment of overindulgence becomes a matter of national importance. Conclusion. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through history's morning after wisdom, we find ourselves with a curious collection of remedies. Viking bone broth and cold fjord air, Franklin's methodical dry toast and honey water, Egyptian ibis beet powder and lotus root preparations, and Persian pearl dust mixed with rose water fit for a king. Each culture, separated by centuries and continents, approached the same fundamental human experience with the tools, beliefs, and values of their time. The Vikings saw hangover recovery as a community ritual, a chance for family care and social bonding. Franklin applied Enlightenment reason to personal weakness, turning discomfort into scientific observation. The Egyptians wove medicine into spiritual practice, creating healing that addressed both body and soul. The Persians elevated hangover treatment to an art form worthy of imperial power. What emerges from these diverse approaches is not just a catalog of curious remedies, but a deeper understanding of how different societies have confronted the universal human tendency to celebrate just a little too enthusiastically. Whether Viking warrior or American philosopher, Egyptian priest or Persian king, the morning after has always required the same basic elements: time, patience, gentle care, and the wisdom to accept that some experiences must simply be endured with as much grace as possible. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about these historical hangover cures is not their exotic ingredients or elaborate preparations, but their recognition that recovery is as much about ritual and community as it is about medicine. The Vikings' family preparing healing broth, Franklin's methodical self-care, the Egyptian spiritual ceremony, the Persian physician's careful attention to royal dignity, all acknowledge that healing happens not just in the body, but in the context of human relationships and cultural meaning. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you might find comfort in knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow's morning might bring, you join a tradition that stretches back through millennia. Somewhere in the quiet spaces between waking and sleeping, the Vikings' bone broth still simmers. Franklin's journal still records careful observations. The Egyptians' lotus flowers still bloom in temple pools, and the Persians' rose gardens still release their healing fragrance into the dawn air. Rest well, knowing that even our most human weaknesses connect us to the great continuity of human experience, and that morning, as it always has, will eventually bring its own gentle restoration. Sweet dreams.